So welcome to the Metaethics part 1, where we are going to be looking at the origins of moral principles, the reason, moral rationalism, emotion, attitudes, and society. Now, metaethics is very different from when we're looking at normative ethics. Normative ethics is looking at what is the right or wrong thing to do. And Kant and utilitarianism and virtue ethics are normative ethics. Metaethics is mainly looking at the language of ethics. But to begin with, just introducing like where does our ethical language come from and where do our ethics come from. As you can imagine, there can be different viewpoints about this. On the first slide there, you see a quote from David Hume. There has been a controversy started of late concerning the general foundations of morals, whether they be derived from reason or sentiment, whether we attain knowledge of them by chain of argument and induction, or by an immediate feeling and finer internal sense. So essentially the two main arguments are going to be whether this is something that is rational, that we can think through, or whether it is something which is going to be more about our feelings and our emotions. So starting off, the origins of moral principles, we're going to be looking at reason. And we're going to be looking at, just very briefly, Hobbes' social contract theory. He wrote a book called Leviathan, and where he explained his whole theory. And what I put here is just summing up in this slide. In the bold, the writing in bold are direct quotes from his book. So he argues that our state of nature, our natural state, take away society, take away our society norms, this is going to be our natural state, is to wage a war of every man against every man. Essentially, it is all for themselves. And to be honest, if you look recently with this whole COVID-19, you can actually see part of what he is saying. As soon as COVID-19 started coming into the West, as soon as people started worrying about it, then people started panic buying in the shops. They didn't care about anybody else. Their self-interest overrode their normal behaviour in society. They wouldn't normally be going out buying all those toilet rolls, but now they are, because they are overriding their sense of social contract with the rest of society. Now, in that, society would not develop, because we would live in continual fear and danger of violent death, and the life of man solitary, poor, nasty, Brutus, and short. So on one level, it's a very pessimistic view of the natural state of humanity, is that because of our own self-interest, that we would have no problem of overriding other people's self-interest. We have no problem of taking away what other people would need to be able to survive. But by doing that, our society would not improve. Our society would not develop, because we would only ever be looking after ourselves. And like I say, we can see that in a classic example with people panic buy, thinking purely about themselves. And on one level, we can see that is a purely natural state, and Hobbes would agree with that, because we are creatures of self-interest. So what we do, what Hobbes argues, is that we sign up to a social contract. We want our society to be better than this. We don't want lives to be solitary, poor, nasty, Brutus, and short. We want our societies to develop and become better places. And yet we still have this element of self-interest which drives our behaviour. So out of self-interest, we sign up to that social contract. It's not about helping other people necessarily, it's about helping ourselves. So long as other rational people sign up to the social contract, we avoid being harmed and society improves. So it is out of self-interest that we are doing this. So I'm not signing up to the social contract of buying loads of toilet roll because I want to help my fellow person. I'm doing it because I expect them to do the same as I am doing, and therefore it's within my self-interest to do it, because then there'll be no toilet roll for everybody. But it's out of self-interest. It's not out of compassion for other people. So that is a rational way of looking at where our moral principles are coming from. Rationally, we are motivated by self-interest, and this social contract, out of self-interest, we rationally believe that other people will sign up to the same social contract. And when we all do, then society improves, society develops, because we all know that the rules and regulations are there in place to meet our self-interest. So it's called rational self-interest. Now, moral rationalism. This is purely Kant. On this slide, very short slide, we know about Kant. His principles are determined by reason, and they have the origins in reason. And because of this, they bind all rational beings in the form of duties. Now, I'm not going to go through the whole of Kantism again. You know about Kant and how he operates, that what distinguishes us from the animal kingdom is our ability to be rational. You know, we can live in the noumenal realm and the phenomenal realm. Animals only live in the phenomenal realm. Phenomenal are the desires and emotions. The noumenal is our rational abilities. So it is our rational abilities that enable us to determine what our moral behaviour is going to be. And he does that by saying, you know, goodwill shines forth like a precious jewel. You know, we need to carry out our duties. What are our duties? He uses the categorical imperative, and therefore moral statements are synthetic a priori. We know all of that. I'm not going to go all of it again. It's just to highlight that he is another example of a moral rationalist. Now we come to emotions and attitudes. Hume argued when you make a judgment about someone's behaviour, you're actually expressing your feelings about their behaviour. There is nothing intrinsic about the behaviour itself in which you are agreeing with, unlike Kant. So for Kant, when you were saying do not murder, it's because there is an intrinsic thing within not murdering somebody. That means we shouldn't murder somebody. We're not for Hume. Okay, we're actually referring to, when we're saying we disagree with murder, we're actually making a judgment about our feelings about the behaviour rather than the behaviour itself. Hume disagrees with Kant. You know, Kant is a rationalist, Hume is an empiricist. And so for Kant, duties demonstrate that morality has an intrinsic value. Moral statements have intrinsic value, you know, regardless of the consequences, that it is wrong to lie. Where for Hume, it is different. It is more about our feelings and emotions and attitudes. That's what we are doing when we are making moral statements. We're not referring to something that is independent of us. Unlike Kant, we're actually demonstrating our feelings. And then the last one about society. Mackie, we're going to talk about Mackie later on in the error principle, but for him, our moral principles have their origins in the society we live in. And in some respects, it's very similar to Hobbes' viewpoint about the social contract. In a society set up in order for its citizens to follow the moral principles. So that's going to include the legal system, the religion, and it is all there for that particular society to flourish and develop. It's not about, again, an independent, objective moral truth to discover. It is more about what is going to enable this society to flourish. And then you got Karl Marx, and he argues that morality isn't really in itself intrinsic. What's really important is the economics of that particular society. That is what determines our morality going to be. So let's go through it step by step. So we have the economics in place. We then have the legal and political superstructure that is put in place to basically support the economics, whether it's going to be communism, whether it's going to be capitalism or socialism, whatever it is, we have that general economic structure in place. And then we put all the legal and political structures in place to make sure that that economics is able to flourish. And then you have the ethics, religion, culture, which justifies the decisions that you've made to keep those economics going. So to sum it up, it's like the elite own the land and resources, and they decide what the economy is going to be like. And whether it's, like I say, capitalism or communism, socialism, it is the same. Then you have the workers who are meeting the needs of the elite. You know, they're the ones who go into the factories, producing the goods, but they're not getting necessarily the benefits from that production. It is the elites. So how do we keep the very small minority of people in the elite situation? It's because we have the legal and political superstructure keeping the status quo. Challenged, but then what we put in place are ethics, religion, culture, justifying and keeping the status quo. So when Karl Marx said that religion is the opium of the people, he wasn't necessarily making a statement whether God exists or doesn't exist. His argument was that what religion is doing, along with ethics and culture, is it is numbing people so that they keep doing what they are doing. They keep going to the factories. They keep supporting an economic structure which is keeping the elite in power. And that is where our morality comes from. It is, instead of religion coming in and changing and upending the status quo, which is what Jesus did, religion has turned into this thing which is keeping the status quo. And that's the purpose of the ethics. And that's the purpose of right and wrong within that structure, is to justify in keeping the status quo. And that both of these ideas lead to, as you can see, moral relativism. Morality is purely relative, is what's going to keep that culture going and keep that culture flourishing. For Karl Marx, it's moral relativism in terms of what is going to keep the elite within their position of power and authority. Well, that's just like the introduction really to metaethics. We're going to start moving on to the two main categories of anti-realism, realism, and cognitivism and non-cognitivism in the next slide. Okay.